Okay, we are up to 1966. And the board looks a little different because they changed the setup again because this is kind of what I'm doing, getting ready for expansion. Now, we are 2 years away from expansion. So this year, the following year, and then 1968 rolls around, and we start seeing the complete change of the league. And it is, as we've come through this original 6-0, we've seen a definite hierarchy take place. Montreal's at the top, 41-21-8. Chicago's second, 37-25-8. Toronto's third, 34-25-11. Detroit, 31-27-12. When going through this series, it is remarkable that Detroit and Chicago didn't win more Stanley Cups, because they were up and in the mix quite a bit, and it is remarkable that they didn't break through and win more Stanley Cups than they did. Now, the chasm that exists between fourth and fifth is why I've started putting this line in here, because the playoff line is massive. It is a 26-point difference to go from fourth to fifth. Now, Boston occupies fifth place with 21-43-6 record, and the Rangers 18-41-11. So it is a chasm that you have 4 teams in the league that are above 500 and 2 that can't even dream of being 500. 500 being the same amount of wins as losses. And again, this is what the NHL doesn't ever want to see again, where we have this kind of a difference between the haves and the have-nots. Hull sets records this year, so Bobby Hull is helping to lead the Chicago Blackhawks to respectable records. Just he can't get back to that Stanley Cup. He gets 54 goals and 97 points. Only plays 65 games, meaning if he played those other 5 games in the season, likely finishes over 100 points, and would have been the first one to do so. But that's coming very soon, because when expansion rolls around, scoring goes up. That's a general rule, that when expansion happens, scoring goes up. When they announce expansion, for sure, where they're going, it's February 9th, 1966, and they haven't outlined the process yet. So, as much as teams might be upset by processes put in place now, look at our protected lists, and this is terrible, and we have to make trades to make sure we don't lose this guy and that guy. Yeah, we're 1 year out from an expansion draft, and the NHL hasn't really formalized how they're going to do this. Just we're adding 6 teams. They're adding Los Angeles, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Philly, San Francisco, and Minneapolis. And it is amazing to me that this league was sort of like, well, yeah, we'll expand. Here's the cities. And the idea at the time was that they would likely use a lot of guys from the minor leagues. At the time, this league is doing well, and financially is doing very well. There are other pro leagues that have popped up that are doing pretty well themselves. So the idea is that they'll go ahead and steal the players from those leagues to fill out the other 6 teams when they join the league. Doesn't quite work out that way, because I don't know that the NHL had a real plan to it, other than we have to expand by 6 teams because our market share is going to be threatened by leagues that exist out west. We have to exist in the West and stop this. Hull wins the scoring title by 19 points. He also wins the goal scoring race by 22 goals. So 32 goals is second place on the goal scoring list that year. So very dominant season by Bobby Hull. First team, so first and second team All-Stars at the end of the year. Makita, Howe, and Hull are your first team up front. LaPerriere and Palat are your first team on defense. And Glenn Hall is still the best goaltender in the league, according to first and second team voting. Second team, Beliveau, Russo, and Mahovlich. Up front and on the blue line, Stanley. Stapleton makes his first appearance, and Gump Worsley is your second team goaltender. Gump Worsley is probably pretty happy not to be with the Rangers at this stage of the game. The Hart goes to Bobby Hull of the Chicago Blackhawks, who also wins the Art Ross. Jacques Laperriere wins the Norris Trophy for the Montreal Canadiens. Bill Selby wins the Calder for Toronto. The Vezina goes to a shared duo of Worsley and Hodge. That's a pretty intimidating duo. Gump Worsley and Charlie Hodge. I think they're both in the Hall of Fame. I know Worsley is. Not sure with Hodge. I think Hodge is. Alex Del Vecchio of Detroit, Lady Bing. Conn Smythe goes to Roger Crozier of Detroit, which is interesting because they don't win the cup. So this is one of those rare times where the losing team has the MVP. But at the same time, the Conn Smythe is such a new trophy, and the Stanley Cup playoffs are only 2 rounds. So it might have been easier for a player on a losing team to get enough attention to warrant winning the Conn Smythe Trophy at that point. The Patrick Trophy goes to Jack Adams for his U.S. hockey contribution. Jack Adams is the only player, GM, coach, who won Stanley Cups as all 3 things. And it's an impressive record, and he helped to grow the league south of the border. And naming it after Lester Patrick made perfect sense, too, since he did the same. So this is an award for U.S. hockey contribution and for helping to grow the game south of the border. You'll notice there isn't a Canadian contribution trophy. As far as I know, there never has been anything really like that. We have Canadian Hockey Hall of Fame. But, I guess it's the idea that this was a Canadian game and that for people who are able to help the game grow south of the border, they should get some recognition. And there you go. Now, the playoffs, I'll get to in a second because we need to discuss the number 1 draft pick. This is the first time that a number 1 draft pick since Monahan, the first ever number 1 draft pick, Gary Monahan, had a solid career. So did Barry Gibbs, who was drafted first overall by Boston. But he didn't have that career with Boston. Played very limited number of games with Boston. He ended up playing for the North Stars, for the Atlanta Flames, for St. Louis, and then finished it out with the Kings. He played 796 games. By today's standard, he probably would be seen as a flop as a number 1 overall draft pick. But for 1966, when we don't have all the scouting that we have now, and draft isn't taken seriously like it is now, this was a solid pick by Boston. But he only played, as I said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20-25 games with Boston, and then he ends up with the North Stars. Playoffs. We'll now talk about playoffs. Montreal at home against Toronto with home ice. They win 4-3 and 2-0. They then go to Toronto and they win 5-2 and 4-1. They are 2-0 on the road. Let's go. Detroit and Chicago. Detroit, of course, is the road team. Chicago's favored. This should be a Chicago series. Chicago wins 2-1 at home. Detroit wins 7-0 in Chicago. In Detroit, Chicago wins 2-1, but Detroit wins 5-1 in Game 4. Detroit then wins on the road in Game 5, 5-3, and then wins Game 6 at home, 3-2. So they win the series in 6, and they're 2-1 on the road. So now Detroit plays Montreal. Both teams playing pretty darn well on the road. And Detroit goes in and beats Montreal in Montreal 3-2. Detroit then goes in and beats Montreal 5-2. Detroit is about to alleviate any concerns about their team only having won 1 Stanley Cup, and this is their time, this is their chance, they're finally going to do it. No. Montreal goes into Detroit and wins 4-2 and 2-1. Montreal wins at home 5-1 and then goes into Detroit and wins in overtime 3-2 to finish 3-0 on the road in that series, meaning the Montreal Canadiens won all 5 of their road games in the playoffs that year. So there you go. Montreal is, once again, your Stanley Cup champions. We'll get into 1967 tomorrow when somebody won the Stanley Cup for the last time. But that's a discussion for tomorrow. For now, there's your teams, your All-Stars, your Hearts, and your Calders and all that wonderful stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.